Hello, everybody, and welcome back to You Exchange, the podcast where I exchange my user experiences to change them, and yours for the better. I'm Jeremy, a mentor and senior user researcher with over 8 years of experience and a background in neuroscience. Throughout my career, I've had the privilege of engaging with hundreds of users around the world. I've created this podcast with the aim of providing my mentorship and educational content, offering actionable tips, knowledge, and guidance in the realm of research to anyone having an interest in this area. And I hope that you will find this episode insightful. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the show. Today, I'm particularly excited because I will be kickstarting a series dedicated to personas. So, personas, you may have already heard about them, you may have already created some in the past, you may have never heard about this, and so if this is the case, this episode is for you. In this series of episodes, you can expect to at least learn what are personas, what can they be useful for, how to create user personas, what can they be used for, or what are their limitations as well, and how can they be complementary to other techniques we might use in user experience. So, without further ado, I'm gonna start. But before anything else, I just want to emphasize a couple points. I'm not an expert at creating personas. In fact, this is something that I had to do only 3 to 4 times in the past in previous projects. However, I know the methodology and I know how to apply it. I also have been through the process of learning more about this. So I'm able to know what could be common questions from people wanting to build personas, and what could be the answers that could help you. I think this is sometimes easier to teach something when we have been through the process of learning this, as opposed to being an expert at something or having some kind of ease when doing something compared to other people, such that we are, let's say, proficient at something, but we don't know what makes us proficient at this thing. So I have been learning about the process in past positions. I have been advocating into the company for the use of personas, but not only. I also have been advocating for their limitations. And in this episode, I want you to learn and to understand the limitations that personas might have. So, let's start. The first thing you have to understand is that the term persona and its use might sometimes, depending on the company and the team you're in, be, let's say, misused or used in a way that is not the best way that it could be used. So usually, what do people think about when we think about personas? What is correct from that, in my opinion, and what we should change in our minds when we think about personas? What we think about in general is a sheet, let's say, or a document that would be kind of an ID, identity card of someone. This someone would have a photo, would have some name and surname, location, demographics, what they're doing for a living, what age, what is their age, do they have children, what occupation do they have, and the like. And this is the first kind of set of criteria that we can see when we look at personas, but not only. You sometimes will see some kind of skills or other kind of set of criterias and technique and aspects that would characterize them. So the first thing that I have in mind when I think about personas is this set and mixed bag of, let's say, criteria that would define someone. So you would have a photo, you would have a name, you would have where they're living, you would have what is their job, you would have a small sentence describing them, and then you would have this kind of, for those of you who like video games or who were in the past or even now into video games, maybe you will understand or you will see what I'm referring to when I say these kind of sliders for skills or for aptitudes. And so this is very common when we see personas in the wild. So things such as extrovert or empathetic or whatever, environmentally conscious, whatever. These kind of aspects. And so this is very common, and then we would have this set of criterias and aspects that would define a person, and then we had some kind of evaluation on scales or sliders. So this is the usual persona. And let me tell you one thing. This is not entirely wrong. So don't get me wrong. This is not wrong per se. This is just incomplete and inaccurate if you want to use personas as a basis for innovation, ideation, and product design. This is wildly insufficient if you want to use them to fuel innovation. So, for you to understand what I'm referring to, let's go back to the basics. Personas are an essential tool in UX design because it will help you to make informed decisions during the design process. And so we have to think about that they are not one-size-fits-all kind of research artifacts. These are research artifacts. They are to be used to ideate and to create something, a product. I don't know for you, but for me, knowing where someone lives and if they have 2 children and the type of occupation they have can, to some extent, interest me if I want to develop a product. But it will be insufficient. So we can not just expect that to be enough when we want to use personas for ideation, first of all. And then, personas are not created for the sake of being created. So that's another thing. Creating a persona should be done with the goal in mind of answering their needs. And so that is one aspect that I rarely see when I look at personas, is their needs, their frustrations, their pain points. I see a list of criteria, but this in and of itself is not enough, of course. So my objective here in this series of episodes is to communicate with you how I see personas. What are they according to me? What is the best process you can come up with to define them? And some tips and tricks, let's say how to avoid some common pitfalls. But from my perspective, again, I'm not an expert. I just want to communicate with you what I know. So, what is the definition of a persona, first of all? Well, a persona is, I would say, a representation of a set of participants you had in a user research, or customers, or at least a target audience that you have in mind who share similarities. So it's a way, from my point of view, and you can check from other sources, and I encourage you to. This is not the best definition, I agree, but this is my definition. This is, let's say, the middle point. If we imagine our participants being in a constellation, different stars, this is the center of a galaxy, the persona. But in a galaxy in which the participants are close enough, because this center, this middle point, should, let's say, group personas more than it divides them. Or, sorry, it should at the same time group users and participants that are close to each other, and allow for enough distinction between groups that should be distinguished, if that makes sense. So, a persona is a way for you to agglomerate users, customers, participants who have a similar set of needs, pain points, and expectations, mental models, and there are many aspects to it that we should consider, but this is the idea. We should agglomerate people who share some set of aspects and criterias. That helps us to ideate with that in mind, because this persona is a fiction. Of course, it's not an actual person, but it represents a bigger group of people who share these characteristics. That's the idea. And then it should also help me to distinguish this group of people who share these similar characteristics from another group of people who share a similar set of characteristics between them, but not with this first group. So I hope I made myself clear. And this is my definition. And so, as such, we want first to have groups of participants being represented by these personas, and then we want these personas to be the basics, the base for us to ideate and to come up with innovation on top of it. So once we know that, we can imagine and we can deep dive. What is a persona? How is a persona defined? Well, a persona doesn't need to be any set of characteristics that you don't need it to be. That's the first thing, in my opinion. But at the same time, it's true that a persona is, as I said, the average user inside of a group that would represent all of the others, let's say. And if you're doing user research and user experience design, you want this middle point to inform your design decisions. What are your design decisions? Well, they will be, what feature should I implement? What should be my design? What should be my navigation? What should be my flow? And so on and so forth. And so, for you to make decisions on that, you need to have the usual set of information, which we always talk about, which are user needs, user pain points, frustrations, mental models, expectations, and so on and so forth. So, yes, you don't need to have an exact set of characteristics. The goal is for you to have a set of characteristics that you can use to further fuel innovation. And these ones tend to be usually the ones that I just said. So that's the point. So, but then be careful, because we have several families of personas, of course. So you can imagine a persona. All personas will have in common that they are the base upon which you will ideate, come up with ideas to, let's say, to come up, with solutions that confront these needs and personas. So, as such, we can imagine several families of personas, several types of personas. And that hopefully can help you to define them. So, first of all, we have the most common one in user experience design. So, let's say, first of all, before I embark this kind of distinction between personas, I will give you some examples. So, one type of persona for an e-commerce website for users purchasing a laptop online, well, this persona can be a CEO of a company purchasing laptops for his team, and he doesn't have a lot of time. He also needs to pay through the company, and he probably needs to buy in bulk. And he probably needs to buy depending on the roles of the people who will use the laptops. Maybe some people who are not, let's say, engineers or developers don't have, let's say, a need for a really robust and powerful technology. And maybe the other ones do. So we can already imagine the specific needs that this persona might have. It doesn't need to be all people are CEOs, but it can be one common role. And if you do research and you observe that all CEOs share this, well, perfect. But it might be that you had participants who were both CEOs, CTOs, and the like, but sharing this kind of needs and pain points. And so in this case, you will agglomerate them into one persona who might not be either CEO or CTO, but probably it could be, I don't know, a decision maker when it comes to providing technology to the company, something like this. I hope you get the point. And so this is one kind of persona, but we can have another one, which would be students who need to buy a laptop with their savings. This is their first laptop ever to take some notes on their laptop during classrooms. And they have specific needs. But then you will tell me, and we could go down the rabbit hole, that these people, both the student and the CEO, might have different product needs, which are the laptops, but they can also have different needs in terms of purchase when they are purchasing the product. So we can imagine the product itself, but also the purchase process. And here we have two products, or at least we have two touch points. So I don't want to complexify things, but you can already understand that two different personas will have two different needs, well, two different set of needs and pain points and so on. And so we can imagine, as I said, the decision maker to purchase laptops for a company. We can imagine the student, but we can also imagine the employee of this first decision maker who purchased the laptop using the laptop inside of the company. This person was not in charge of purchasing the laptop. However, they are the user. And so you can already imagine a distinction in these categories of personas, with the first one being a user persona. So a user persona is usually the one used by user experience professionals, product managers, because it's a mechanism for us to connect with end users' needs, motivations, behaviors, and skills. And so they are the people who will use a product, but then we can also imagine a buyer persona. They are the people who will purchase or take the decision to purchase a product. That is one distinction we can have, but then there are many, many, many others, of course. So I will give you other types of personas which exist. We have, of course, the primary persona. Sorry, and before I move forward, these types are defined by the fact that they would be of more or less importance inside of a project, let's say. So you would have the primary persona. So imagine you develop a product, I don't know, a fitness app. We could imagine the primary persona being, I don't know, the young adult going to the gym every day. We could imagine the second persona being someone who would, I don't know, try to lose some weight and going back on track. So we can imagine two kind of personas having different needs here. And one of them might be the primary one because you're focused on this target audience. Imagine. So this primary would be the main user of the product. So it's the one for which the system, for whom the system should be designed. So when you have that persona in mind, his or her needs should be entirely satisfied in this case. You should have this persona front and center of your strategy. And so, no matter what, you should always have primary personas. And it doesn't need to be one only, it could be several. However, I would advise you to have 1 to 3 maximum, because then it means by trying to answering the needs of everyone, you will answer the needs of no one. So, being a primary or a secondary persona doesn't need, it's not explained by what you do or what are your expectations. It's not because I go every day to the gym that I will be more of a consumer to the app than if I am trying to get back on track and I want to go to the gym 3 times a week. The only thing that matters is who is your target audience. If the people who go every day to the gym would not be users of your app, it's not your primary persona. If the only users of your app would be the ones who want to get back in shape, these are your primary persona. Because these are the ones you're designing the app for. This is your market. Your product market fit is with these people. So that's the idea of having the primary and the secondary persona. The secondary persona shares some common goals and needs with the primary persona. For instance, they will also need to go to the gym 3 times a week. And since the first one goes every day to the gym, at some point they will have some overlap. That's an example, of course. Sorry for how silly it might sound, but I hope it helps. So this second persona will, of course, have its own characteristics, but they might not be prioritized in the system design. So you also can have several secondary personas, of course, and they need to be considered as well, but their needs should not interfere with the primary persona. So the priority should always be given to the primary persona. You can also imagine a negative or excluded persona. I don't know. Imagine you are doing some calisthenic app with some acrobatic moves. Probably that's a silly idea, but probably you don't want teenagers to try these out without supervision. So probably this should be your anti-persona. Those for whom the product should not be designed. Those who shouldn't, I was about to say who should not be considered. They should be considered, especially for the fact that you should account for, let's say, misuses, uses that would be against what is intended from you. Or another example, for instance, if you are designing a pill organizer, maybe a child could be the anti-persona. Because if you design something that is intended for adults, well, your anti-persona could be a child. And then you have, of course, other kinds of personas. You have additional personas, concerned personas. They are progressively further and further from the primary persona, but there are personas who could be considered as well to design a product. Okay, now before I move forward, I just want to emphasize what would be the main methodology for you to come up with a persona. I would say that is my opinion. Personas are deeply rooted in research. We can make assumptions into who would be a persona, and it's not a silly thing to do, in my opinion. If you lack more evidence and if you're pressured on time, and this is something I observed in the past, and it can be useful to do so. So imagine I want to develop a new technology for my self-driving cars. Well, I could imagine that people who would use self-driving cars would be whatever, busy professionals, and defining that and knowing that I could design with their needs in mind. But this would be assumptions. And that's what we call oftentimes proto-personas. However, I would like to make the distinction between two things. In my opinion, there are assumption personas and proto-personas. These are different things, in my opinion. Assumption personas are personas who would be built either in solo or team brainstorm mode. Brainstorm workshop. That would be a proto-persona with no further evidence and nothing to back this up. It's like literally we all sit down in a room or on Zoom call and we brainstorm over who could be our target personas. And this is not bad per se. I'm just saying if you use that as a source for ideation, be really careful, because you have absolutely no proof that this persona is actually the end user of your product. You might have some hints here and there from stakeholders inside the company and so on, yes, but it will absolutely not be enough to develop a product to answer those needs. And of course, I'm not saying that personas are the, let's say, no-brainer for any product development. We have all seen technologies and products being designed without necessarily strong research to back this up, and sometimes it worked. My assumption for this to work is that there was a demand from the market. And so even if there was no clear process to draft a persona, it was kind of in the cloud, let's say, this persona. This persona was existing. This persona was imagined because there was some things to back this up. Even if it was not formalized on paper or on a PowerPoint or on a Figma or whatever. It was existing because there was a product market fit. And so if there is a product market fit, you know who is your audience and you know how to design for this audience. This is applicable for people who have no, let's say, dedicated UX team. But if you are a UX professional, it is your duty to advocate for the use of personas, because it's part of your responsibilities, I would say. So the first type of these, let's say, what I would say proto-personas would be the assumption persona. It's this kind of persona who is built on assumptions and hypotheses. And it's good. It's actually good to do the exercise. but then it needs to be validated or invalidated before moving forward. It's like building a good product on a castle of assumptions, let's say, on sand. It can work, but it might, most probably will not. So once you have that, and in my opinion it's a good thing to do, it's to start with that, and then you can pinpoint with your team which are your gaps in understanding and which are your the aspects you would like to research further. For instance, you think exactly this kind of personas that I said. Yeah, we could have some CEOs buying the laptops, and we could have then the users using the laptop and so on. Okay, well, it seems pretty reasonable to think that, but then we would need to verify that. And so what you would do is, in my opinion, the best second step would be to build some proto personas. And proto personas are personas who are built on no new research. That would be my definition. If I started out a job in a company, I would start by building some proto personas. Meaning I would review existing research that was done before, because this is gold mine. The research is gold mine. It's just using it instead of interviewing again and again new users. You could just research and review what was already done, and then you synthesize and you come up with personas. I'm calling that proto personas because they are kind of, let's say it's a draft of a persona, because it's used with data that was not meant to be used to build this persona. And so it's good because it's still data coming from research. However, as it was not gathered with this end goal in mind, let's say it's tangential. The data is tangential and it's good to use, but if you go to measure something with one thing in mind, you will be laser focused on that thing and you will gather exactly the data you need for. So that's why I would say these are proto personas built on reviewing the past research, but then you need to confirm them with actual user research. And that will be the goal of the next episodes. I will cover how to come up with personas, how to create them, how to use them, how to formalize them, and how to synthesize them. I hope you learned at least one thing. As always, if this is the case, please share, subscribe, and I hope to see you in the next episode. Until then, take care. Bye-bye. And that's it for today's episode. Thank you everyone for joining me today on New Exchange. I hope you found today's episode insightful and valuable. Make sure to subscribe in order for you not to miss the next episode. Share it if you liked it, and leave a review. Thank you for your time and attention. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions for future topics, feel free to reach out directly to me. You can find all the details in the show notes. And see you in the next episode. Bye-bye. And